The Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulger. Chapter 7, Part 7. Then Palin Matalin covered him with her darkness. He was gone. The tears gathered in my eyes. Fain would I have pressed its hand to my lips. I know it was useless for me to try and call him back or to follow him. So, with a heavy heart, I turned and pressed forward in the direction he had indicated. I was soon at the outer edge of Palin Matalin, and to tell the truth, I felt my heavy heart grow light again. Bulger, too, showed his delight at being once more in the warm sunshine. Breaking out into the wildest barking, he raced hither and thither with the joyous air of a boy set free from long and irksome task. As Beniaga had described to me, I now found myself standing upon a lofty parapet, overlooking a delightful valley through which I longed to wander, after my long stay in Beniaga's cave and the gloomy trail through Palin Matalin's depths. Walking along the edge of the cliff, I was not long in coming upon the stair of the evil spirit, or Boga Drapa, as it was called. It was jagged, irregular, and tilted here and there, and yet quite even and stair-like when one considered that it was one of nature's building. As the blind hermit had warned me, the treacherous slime covered Boga Drapa's entire length, forever renewed by the impure waters which trickled down its steps. To attempt to descend would have been worse than madness. No human foot was sure enough to tread those slippery stones and reach the bottom. Although I was impelled by the strongest desire to hasten forward, I saw that a single rash act might end my life. Ordinary obstacles have no terror for me, but when nature sets a threatening barrier in my way, I halt, but I do not surrender. And therefore I sat calmly down to ponder over the problem that faced me. For 3 days I tarried on this parapet, and each day I visited Boga Drapa and gazed long and fixedly upon its far-reaching flight of rocky steps. On the third day, I had solved the problem. Hastily gathering up every fragment of limestone lying near, I piled it in a cone-shaped heap, and round it and over it I laid a mass of dry leaves and billets, and over such logs as I could lift. Then, striking fire with my flint and tinder, I set the pile in flames. In the morning, I was rejoiced to find a heap of the purest quicklime beneath the ashes. By means of an empty skull of some animal of the deer family, which I found lying nearby, I at once began to feed the waters trickling over Boga Drapa's steps with the lime. All that day, and up to the noon hour of the next, I kept the water which flowed down the stairway milk white with the lime. Now, however, came the greatest difficulty. From the size of the stream, I realized that it would be impossible for me to stay its course by means of any dam that I could build for a longer time than one brief half hour. But I dared not wait too long, for the coating of lime, which by this time I knew must have been deposited on the rocky steps, to harden in the sun. The dam might break and undo all my work. At high noon, when the sun was beating down the hottest, I put the last touch to my dam. I was startled to see with what rapidity the waters gathered in the basin I had built. With anxious eyes and throbbing heart, I stood at the head of Boga Drapa's stair of rock and gazed up and down. I could see no signs of drying on the black and glistening steps. One moment after another glided by. At last, a faint trace of whiteness began to show itself here and there. I turned an anxious glance at the gathering waters. The frail dam seemed about to yield to the ever-increasing pressure. In one or two places, I caught glimpses of tiny rivulets trickling through. Once more, with a terrible feeling of faintness, I glanced down the long, dark flight of steps. Half blinded by the noonday sun, I nevertheless caught sight of a snow-white crust on the stairway. Now was my time, or never. Calling out to Bulger to precede me, I sprang boldly down the stair, which, till that moment, had been black with treacherous slime. The waters broke away and came rushing at my very heels. Down, down I went in headlong haste, bounding like a deer from step to step. My heart sank within me as I felt the torrent, now mad and raging, splatter its spray on my neck. Another instant, and I'm saved. My feet strike firm. I see the fair country come nearer and nearer. Another leap, and with my faithful Bulger, I've cleared the dreaded stairway of Boga Drapa. Staggering forward, I reach the greenswards of the valley and fall fainting after my terrible race for life. Bulger's mingled wailing and caresses roused me after a few moments of clouded brain, and then all was well. And yet a shudder stole over me as I raised my eyes to take a last look at the rocky stairway of Boga Drapa, now clad once more in its black, glistening, treacherous slime. Refreshed by a hearty meal upon the luscious fruit which grew in wonderful provision on every side, followed by a deep draught of cool, clear spring water, and calling joyfully to my faithful Bulger to follow me, I set out for the distant summit of the ridge which shut in this peaceful little corner of the earth's surface, so well fitted for the home of human beings, and yet so utterly abandoned and tenantless, even by four-footed creatures. While I am a great admirer of nature in all her aspects, from wildest grandeur to picture-like delicacy, yet no spot which is not inhabited by man or beast can long hold me content. I must have life, not the dull, spiritless life of tree, shrub, or plant, ever chained to one spot, but the restive, bounding, throbbing life of man or animal to study, contemplate, and reflect upon. Therefore it was that I determined to pass at once out of this beautiful little valley. I pushed on with eager step, for I was desirous of gaining the high land before nightfall. In this I was successful, but the twilight had so deepened when I reached the crest of the ridge that any survey of the country lying beyond was impossible. Shortly after I had lighted a bivouac fire, Bulger came in with a bird of the quail kind, and I proceeded to broil it on the live embers. The faithful animal was delighted to be once more in a country in which he could serve me, and while our supper was cooking, took occasion to go through a number of his old tricks, in order to see his little master's face brighten up. Side by side, we lay down for the night in the faraway land and were soon fast asleep. The morning broke with rare splendor. I hastened to examine the country beneath me. It was dotted here and there by groves and bits of woodland, and seemed unusually green and fruitful. What attracted my attention more than anything else was the fact that as far as my eye could reach, the region was watered by a perfect network of little rivers, which glistened in the morning sun like bands of burnished silver. I had never seen the like. It occurred to me at once that should these streams prove too deep and rapid to ford, it would force me to change my course entirely and pass either to the north or south until I reached a clear country. It was pretty well toward sundown when I stood upon the confines of this strange land, which I name Polypotamo, or Many Rivers. The streams, which varied from 10 to 20 feet in width, were deep, clear, and swift. As you may readily imagine, such a country was very productive. Fruit and flower-bearing shrubs and trees, all of a most beautiful green, grew in the wildest abundance. The air, cooled and purified as it was by the numerous streams of limpid water, was like a magic inhalation, carrying a strange feeling of dreamy delight to every part of the body. Said I to myself, if this fair land be not inhabited, then it is a monstrous pity, for here kind nature has spread her riches with a more than usually lavish hand. Bulger and I stretched ourselves upon the bank of the first stream that we reached, and were preparing for a nap after a long day's tramp, when suddenly the strangest noises reached our ears. He startled up with a look of mingled alarm and curiosity, which, could I have seen my own face, I would undoubtedly have found pictured there in equally strong lines. Louder and louder grew these curious sounds. I listened with pricked up ears as I strained my eyes in the direction whence they came, eager to catch the first glimpse of the beings who uttered them. I had not long to wait. About an eighth of a mile away, my eyes fell upon a sight which, in spite of the possible dangers threatening my life, in case these creatures had proven to be vicious or savage, caused me to burst out into a fit of uncontrollable laughter. There, in full view, was a troop of human creatures, dwarfish in stature, not being much over 4 feet in height, who seemed incapable of using their legs as we do, but moved about from one place to another by hopping, as some birds do, or as rabbits would if they moved about standing upright on their hind legs. In an instant they caught the sound of my voice, and with the swiftness of the wind and with an ease that astonished me, leaped over the two intervening streams, each of which was at least 15 feet in width, and came bounding toward us with the same gigantic leaps. The whole thing was done so quickly, and the mode of locomotion was so novel and altogether wonderful, that I was surrounded before I knew what happened to me. It is needless to say that I couldn't understand their language, although I soon mastered it, consisting as it did of pure Aryan roots, no word being of more than 3 letters. The manhoppers, such is my translation of their name, Uma Lumbus, ranged themselves in a circle round Bulger and me, and threw themselves on their faces, so to speak, for their arms were ridiculously out of proportion to their bodies, and threatened with shrill outcries and menacing movements to kick Bulger and me to death instantly unless we surrendered unconditionally. It was a novel sight. Bulger was inclined to advise resistance, but when I had given a hurried glance at their feet, which were very large and attached to astonishingly vigorous legs, I deemed it only prudent to run up the white flag. In fact, I gave them to understand that we threw ourselves on their mercy. But first, a word about these strange people. They were, as I have said, small of stature, and let me add that upon their narrow, sloping shoulders were set delicate, doll-like heads, animated by large, lustrous black eyes of extreme softness and expression. Their arms looked like the arms of a boy on the body of a man, but, although so small, for they reached only to their waist and ended in tiny, shapely hands, yet they showed themselves possessed of extraordinary strength and dexterity. Their legs, however, were the most wonderful part of them. In fact, I might almost say that the Umilumbas were all legs, so out of all proportion was the development of their limbs. The effect of this disproportionate may be easily imagined. It so dwarfed their bodies that they appeared like cones set upon 2 legs. And we'll pause here and we'll continue with this story and the little baron's altercation with the Umulumbas in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.